Everyone has a bright light inside of them that deserves to be seen by the world. That's why it's time to shine the light on the extraordinary who are accomplishing phenomenal things. This is the Shine Out Loud Show with Lillian Obogo.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and wherever in the world you are, and welcome to another episode of the Shine Out Loud Show with me, Lillian Obogo. Now, I have a doctor, a GP, an author, a CBT practitioner, yes, a GP and a CBT practitioner, and it is absolutely incredible to have on the show because she's talking about something that is very crucial right now. It's about the mental well-being and health of young people and as well as adults, but looking at young people, especially during this stressing and trying period of COVID, which is shown to have a great impact in causing a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear in children. So join me and welcome Dr. Lee David to the show. Hi, Dr. Lee.
Hi. Great to be here.
So glad to have you. So we're talking about your journey. And so how did you come to be involved in the medical field?
Well, originally I wanted to be a vet. and then I just thought, you know what, I think I can travel more. And it seemed like just more inclusive. It seemed like I could do more things by doing medicine. So then I changed and applied to do medicine instead and managed to get through and then became a doctor.
Okay, so you wanted to be a vet first and then you're like, nah, there's more prospects, so I'm going to go into medicine.
Yes. And people, I love people, actually. I think that's one of the things that, really makes health professionals do what they do. It's about relating to people. It's hearing the story of the individual that you're sat with. You don't just see them as a disease or as a number, but actually just hearing that individual story. And so actually you get that opportunity. It's very privileged being a doctor. You hear stories that people don't have maybe never shared with anyone in their life. So it's an incredible opportunity actually to connect with people.
That's a powerful thing. And we need to also take a moment because I need to actually, first of all, we're talking about COVID, we're talking about what's going on. And the fact is, I need to take a moment, my listeners need to take a moment, my viewers need to take a moment for us, first of all, to say, thank you for your decision to becoming a doctor. Thank you for the work that you're doing right now during COVID. And we really appreciate you as a doctor of color, as a Black woman in medicine. You are actually in the front line where your own health could be impacted in a very serious way. So we have to take a moment to actually acknowledge first and foremost that this is what you do on a day-to-day basis. So from myself to you, thank you for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. And I think, I'd want to extend that out right across the country or even the world to all of the doctors who are standing up and facing, and the nurses, and actually all of the health professionals, everyone, the care assistants, the carers, people who are working often unrecognised, really hard, long hours.
Yes.
I have an elderly mum, she's in her 90s, she has carers and they have come to her throughout, and it's been hard, and sometimes they've been visiting way more people than they're supposed to, but they're getting around to all these elderly, vulnerable people, and it's actually an amazing contribution.
And that's powerful. And also, I think, with the clap for the NHS that went round, we should also acknowledge, and sometimes you pointed out the people who don't get the acknowledgement, like even the janitors, the cleaners, the cleaning staff. And it is, Dr. David, I think, we need to acknowledge every last person, because without them, you can only imagine what the hospitals will look like. Without them, you can imagine the burden on the NHS already. So yes, Dr. David, I think that we need to definitely extend that.
Definitely.
So we're talking about you being a GP, an author, founder of the 10-Minute CBT. So what drew you to CBT? And actually, before we talk about what drew you to CBT, I think we should preface that with, what is CBT?
Okay, so CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, and it's a psychological talking therapy that's probably got the most evidence that it works, that it actually changes people, and that it has outcomes that are positive for people, for mental well-being, and not just for mental health. I mean, it's effective for depression, for anxiety, for lots of different things like eating disorders, PTSD, obsessive compulsive disorder. But also what's really interesting is that it's very effective for helping people with physical health problems as well, ranging from cancer to chronic fatigue to irritable bowel. And it's because it's looking at the ways we respond to our health conditions and how we manage our health. And actually how you do that can be there are ways that you can support yourself and increase your well-being, whether or not you have a physical condition. And otherwise people can get into cycles of kind of negative thinking and perhaps unhelpful behaviors that cause difficulties and make life more difficult than perhaps it needs to be.
Right. So is CBT and NLP along the same range of tools and tool systems? Because people have heard of NLP. So does CBT live along side by side?
Yes, it's very similar. I mean, NLP, I think you see some of the techniques, some of the visualization, some of the imagery techniques would probably be used in CBT. I mean, CBT is very eclectic. It covers a whole range, and as it grows, it kind of tends to just start including all the bits that are useful, and it's very happy to kind of bring them all in and call it all CBT. So it now also involves mindfulness, and the kind of what we call the third wave of CBT, which includes mindfulness and more acceptance and compassion focused therapy, which is actually one of my passions, which is about moving away from even self-esteem, which is a judgment of, am I good enough? How great? Versus self-compassion, which is, can I just be kind to myself even when life is really tough? And that can be really important when you're struggling and when life is difficult, or when you've had something go wrong. Then actually it may not be about judging yourself of how good should my esteem be, but actually, can I just support myself through this really difficult time?
And that's powerful because, we know that self-esteem is great to have, but sometimes can be used as a yardstick. And if my life does not measure up here and here and here, and can be used to then met out punishment, and I'm not good enough, I'm never going to, So I think that compassion piece is critically important. So we now know what CBT is. What drew you to it as a doctor? What drew you to CBT?
Well, I think there's always an element of a good doctor is always quite nosy, and they just like to know about people. So if you're really interested in what makes this person tick, what makes that, work for this person, what is going on here, and it's really trying to break it down. I love the fact that it's actually very analytical, that it's quite structured, that you get that it makes sense as a framework, and often you'll kind of work through it with people, and they're like, oh yeah, of course, I never thought of it that way, so it's stuff that people already know quite often. It's not actually these kind of clever revelations that I know that they don't know. It's very much like, actually, it's just changing that spotlight of focus, and people suddenly recognize stuff from a different perspective. And I love that kind of empowering, where you're giving the tools to the person for them to take that ownership. I think, like everybody, we're all drawn to wanting to find ways to deal with our own stresses. So, I'm always up for finding things that will help me, help my family, help people I care about, to deal with all the different stuff that we all face on a daily basis.
And I can see the actual use of it. I can see it being actually finding a place in the medical practice. And speaking of which, when we're looking at the medical practices, because there's this ideology that the medical practice, anything that is not considered to be pure science and pure medicine, it's kind of poo-pooed. So how does the medical practice now sit with the introduction of things like CBT, mindfulness, even things like alternative therapies like acupuncture, acupressure? How does that now sit within the medical field?
Well, I think one of the reasons, I guess, as a medical professional, I'm drawn to CBT is because there is quite a lot of evidence. So there is a scientific basis that says actually this does work.
Right.
And so I'm always drawn to things. I can't get rid of my medical training that kind of draws me towards that type of thing, perhaps over and above things where there's a bit less evidence. Having said that, I think we're living in the real world, and pragmatism says that if something is effective for somebody, then, as long as it's not causing harm, it's not super expensive or something, then, I'm very much in favour of people exploring their own personal ways of what works. Really, life is about, is this working or isn't it? And that's one of the tenets that I actually use a lot in therapy is this decision one that's working for you in the big picture of your life? Is it moving you towards something that you care about? Is it moving your life in a direction, if you think about your values, things that matter to you, is it moving you towards that? Or is this decision, this behaviour, this action actually in the bigger picture taking you away? And really, it's then people can decide for themselves. And that, again, is really important to me, is that people make their own decisions about what they care about and what do they want to stand for as individuals. And that, again, makes therapy really interesting, because I don't know I'm not there to tell people what they should care about. Yeah. I'm just there to support them in how to do the journey that they want to do.
And I like that point that you made it's about the journey that they want to do, and you're giving them tools to do it. And I think what is more empowering is that you're not giving them things outside of themselves. You're helping them to unlock what's already in there and actually utilize. So you're making them already feel from the very beginning more resourceful. So when we're looking at this and looking at what led you down the road to creating 10-minute CBT, what diagnostic mistakes were being made that led to you say, you know what, we need another way, that sparked the 10-minute CBT?
Well, I did my CBT training quite early in my GP career. So I trained as a GP, and then I had an opportunity when I was working in Oxford. They gave me an opportunity to go and do some extra training in something else that I was interested in with a group of others. Okay. So I chose CBT because I was just fascinated by it as a topic. And what I found was that as I was learning the CBT, and I was imagining, well, this is going to be great, I'll be able to have a second sort of area that I can work on, it will kind of keep me motivated, it might give me an extra sort of set of skills. It's always great in the workplace if you've got multi skills. So I did it, and then as I was doing it, what I discovered was that my GP practice, not just I was learning to be a therapist, but actually my practice as a GP also changed. Okay. And I found I think I'm actually better. I think I can see improvements. I'm better at explaining things. I'm better at kind of managing people's mental health, even though I don't have the full 50 minutes or an hour that I would have as a therapist. So I just became really interested in my kind of scientific mindset. Well, what is it? What's happened to me? What are those changes that I have taken on board? And can I take them out and then teach them to other GPs? And that is where 10-minute CBT was born, because that's an educational organisation. So it's a company. We provide training either face-to-face or online for health professionals. So GPs, nurses, a whole range of health professionals, in just using bite-sized bits of cognitive therapy in their routine work. So it's not trying to say, right, you have to have a therapy session, but actually it's recognizing that, as a physio, you're dealing with someone's back pain, but actually they may also, why they're in pain, is it stress, is stress playing a role? And if you can help boost their well-being, we've done work with people with multiple sclerosis in sort of supporting increasing physical activity. And again, often the psychological, the emotional aspects play a really important role in whether people feel capable of doing more, or how they go about trying to do more, or how they work with their physio. So there's so many things that you can do that actually woven into the routine work that health professionals are doing. If you can bring a little bit of addressing some of the emotional factors that might be getting in the way, then I really feel that you can have much better outcomes.
Okay. And I like the fact that you're educating other professionals. You're educating other professionals to see the person behind the condition. Because sometimes I can only speak for myself. When I go in to see a GP, or I'm not seeing my regular GP and I'm talking to someone, and you feel like the person that you're talking with is talking at you. And it's so off-putting because you're like, I'm explaining, you don't feel like you're actually having a conversation. You feel like they're talking at you or over you. And it's like, and sometimes you leave the room feeling like, did I not explain myself properly? So the reason why I bring that up is one of the things that we find is sometimes we do not know how to take charge of our own health process. So what will be the top questions that we need to ask our doctors to take charge of our health, so that when we go in, we know their time is limited, that we ask the right question that give us the right diagnosis, or the right questions that give us the right direction that we need to take to actually deal with what we need to deal with.
I think it's two ways, isn't it? Because you know you need the doctor needs to listen, acknowledge what they're hearing, and that's a lot of what I teach is that skills in communication. Really, it comes back to not doing therapy to somebody, but actually what words and what and when do you pause, and how do you listen, and so there's a lot of reflecting back. It's trying to help people make sense of what they say.
Yes.
And so one of the key skills for me is this kind of listening, and then rephrase, maybe helping people to recognize what it is that they're actually concerned about. So I think one of the things that's really helpful when you're going to see a doctor or any health professional is just to spend a bit of time thinking about what is it that I'm worried about.
Yeah.
What are the, if I had to list it, what are the 2 or 3 symptoms that I've got that I'm concerned about? Why am I worried about them? Is there a particular reason? Have I got a family history that the doctor needs to know about? Have I had something before? What's going on? Have I been in contact with somebody? So there's and it's trying to say that quite early, so that you can get the context, so you can say, right, okay, so you've got this, and you've got this, and actually you're especially worried because your dad had something similar, and actually it was a serious illness for them. And so again, immediately you're on the same page really quickly, and that I think makes a big difference. So if you've taken time to know what that is, then I think, because what's always really difficult is that as a health professionals, you have this great consultation and you've gone through and you think, oh, we've talked, I felt I've listened. And then they're just going out they've got their hand on the door frame and they say, there was just one other thing I was worried about. And actually that is the main reason that they'd come. And it's like some really big thing. And you're like, my chest pain, or I'm really actually very depressed, and something that you can't leave. So then you have to say, okay, come back and sit down. So to avoid those moments where everyone's missed it, and the consultation's gone like separate ways, it's really helpful to know those things in advance.
Okay, so there's a way that you're saying, yes, the doctors have to listen, but we have to become very clear about and upfront about what we want to put forward, what are our symptoms, what are we concerned about, what is the major concern, and for a better choice of words, front load that into the conversation so that we get the point across in the way that we want to be heard.
Yeah, because 10 minutes goes by, boom, it flies by, especially when you've got something complex and lots of decisions to make. So you want to make sure that the key stuff is front loaded, as you say, so that it's dealt with and actually thought about properly, as opposed to an aside at the end when it might be one of the most important things.
Okay. And that's crucial. So people, think about your symptoms. Think about what is the most important things. Think about, okay, your time, you have a finite time with your GP, and ask the questions that are most important. And I think that's, once we keep remembering, and also I think we also need to remember that we are also in charge of our health, and we have to think about it, how we treat our career. What do we want? How do we want it to look, feel like? And we have to make those decisions. And we're talking about COVID, and we know that it's unprecedented. The whole world is on timeout. It's changed the landscape of everything. It's changing how we live our day to day. And we've seen more people suffering from mental health issues. And a lot of it has to do with the isolation with lockdown. What can we do in a very practical way to maintain our mental health during this time?
And that's a huge thing. And I think it's not just now, but it's going to be as we come out, because I suspect there's a lot of anxiety. And that's partly managed by people locking themselves away by lockdown. And as we're having to come out, then the anxiety might start to increase, because there's a kind of that sense of risk is going to go up. And so actually the anxiety might go up as well.
Exactly.
And I think we're going to see a wave of kind of stress, and it's going to be behind the COVID, and we have to make sure that we're really recognizing and dealing with that effectively. So we've come up with a sort of a 4-step approach of what people can do to manage their well-being, which we've called Face COVID.
Okay.
And it's designed for young people, but actually it works for everyone. It works for me. So I think, and so I talk about it quite a lot. So it's 4 steps. It's FACE.
Okay. So I'm writing that down right now.
Okay. So we've got F, which is focus on what you can control. So that's just remembering to choose. There are a lot of things we can't control in this pandemic. We can't control the politicians. We can't control our neighbours. We can't even control the anxiety or the negative thoughts that we might get in our own minds, because you can't actually control your feelings or your thoughts. They're just things that we experience. So what can you control? Well, you can control your actions, you can control your behavior, and you can choose things that are within your power to make, and then you feel less powerless, and that reduces that sense of anxiety, because we're starting to feel less powerless, less out of control, choosing things that we can do. So that's a really important starting point.
Okay.
Then A is for acknowledge what's happening inside. And that's a kind of recognition. It's a bit like mindfulness. It's knowing, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? What's going on for me? And what do I need to address? Because if I don't know, if I'm feeling anxious, I need to know that, because then I can
you can put your finger on it. Yes,
exactly. And it might be a kind of labeling thing where we're just saying, I'm having feelings of anxiety, I'm having worry thoughts about this happening or this happening, I'm having these images of pandemic, of people in intensive care, it's really scary, the masks, or whatever it is. And just by acknowledging that is going on, it gives you again that power to make decisions about what to do that are going to be helpful, that take you back to that towards or away thing that we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Then we have C, and it's commit to a plan. So that's choosing, what can I do? And it's actually setting yourself some goals and doing them. So changing what we do, our own behavior. So that's kind of focusing on back to the stuff we can control. And I'm a real believer in micro steps. So when you set a plan, you actually choose a step that's tiny, that doesn't feel like it's going to make any difference. And you think, is it really worth doing that? But actually what you're doing is breaking kind of unhelpful patterns of behavior. We're shifting out of maybe habits, which we can get into. Mental habits. We can get into kind of unhelpful habits. And so it's taking tiny steps. So it might be going for a walk in the garden before you try and go for a walk outside, outside the house.
Right.
It might be finding your trainers in the garage and putting them by the front door as a start. That's your micro step. So it's just these tiny, going to the post box, just looking out of the window and just having a breath, just to remind yourself that the world is out there. So there's all these tiny little things. It doesn't have to be these mega moments where it's overload and I can't do it, and then I was just going to give up and feel like a failure.
I know. I think my favorite one out of your C steps of the commit is something as simple as spending an extra 10 minutes in the shower. I'm like, I can do that.
Yes, exactly. And you know what? And just enjoy it, or just be mindful of it. Feel the water on your shoulders. Breathe in, just smell your shower gel. And that is mindfulness right there. It's just noticing the moment. And so it's engaging what we do with attention. So our mind is not sort of focusing on, what does that happen? But actually, what's happening right now?
We can't control.
So right now, I'm in the shower. And so I can shift my attention and notice my feet on the ground and notice the water. I can look up, I can look at the sky. As I'm walking, I can take a step. And all of those things I can control.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. For me, I've noticed just myself that I'm fine. And as soon as I have to go out where I can take a walk to the park, I'm fine. But as soon as I have to go into, let's say, a store, I literally have moments where I totally freak out. It's like, oh my God, there are too many people. I have to literally have to catch myself and go, no, this is absolutely fine. These are the steps you're going to take. This is what you're going to do. And this is how you're going. And so I'm mindful about that, because if not, we will be in this state of anxiety continuously.
Absolutely. And when you're starting to notice that, and what's really great that you've noticed it, and that you're able to say, oh, I'm getting anxiety, this is coming up for me now. Right, the shop's coming nearer. I'm starting to feel anxiety. Oh, and actually, if you can notice it right there, that's the acknowledge bit.
Yeah.
And then maybe coming into your body. So you've committed to your plan. Your plan is, I want to go shopping. It matters to me. I need to go. I've got to do some, I need food, or actually I want to get back to normal life, or whatever the reasons, there's a good reason to go. And you could come into your body, feet on the ground, you might rub your hands together, or I sometimes get, when my kids are getting stressed, I'll get them to look for colours and say, how many different greens can you see? And they'll be like, oh, there's a green grass, there's a green leaf, and again, it's just shifting your attention out of the kind of worry thoughts, the kind of disaster movie which is playing on the big screen. And I kind of think you're trying to shrink that movie down.
Yes.
To phone sized. It's still playing. You don't have to switch it off. It's perfectly okay if it carries on playing. But you want it a little bit smaller, and then you can pop it in your pocket and carry on going to the shop if that's what matters to you. Because what you don't want to do is end up in a lot of avoidance, because that is one of the cycles of anxiety, is that we avoid things that we're fearful of. And then we lose confidence, and then our anxiety grows, and we have to avoid even more. And so that's how
it's a vicious circle.
Exactly.
Yes, it forms a vicious circle. The other way is, if you were talking using the movie metaphor, is you can change the color. So if it's a very bright movie, you darken the movie, you turn it black and white, or you turn it into a cartoon, you change the soundtrack. Because sometimes and that's why when we watch movies, you have to look at the scores and the music that is used. So turn the movie down, turn it off, make it silent. And then you find that you can breathe a bit more.
Definitely. And the other thing you could do, which is very similar, which I think that's quite an NLP technique that you're talking about there, which I would definitely, think is a great one to use. You can also change the soundtrack.
Yes.
And so if the movie is playing some negative thoughts that's saying, this is going to be terrible, or you're going to fail at this, you're going to make a fool of you, or whatever it's saying, you can change it to Donald Duck saying it. You can speed it up. So it's really fast. I'm just going to be a failure. It's going to be so stupid. And, I sometimes work with teenagers on one-to-one therapy, and we often get a voice changer app, where you where you get them to say these negative thoughts.
That's a good idea.
And then it comes back. I've got an auto rap. I've got one where it turns it into a rap. So you say this negative, I'm going to be a failure, it's going to be terrible. And then it raps it back at you. And then, of course,
awesome.
You start to laugh, immediately, because so the thought becomes disempowered. It turns down the volume, because it immediately start to recognize, just thought, just
exactly.
Thought.
Yeah,
that's all it is.
And
that's to believe it.
Exactly. That's the fun part. You don't have to believe it. And then you can actually even choose to deal with it differently. You can, there's other ways to put them in play. And and this is why I love therapy like CBT, that you can actually play with it and give people tools that they can walk away with, that they can enact themselves.
Exactly. So I have to just come back to the very final step of the face model, because I realise we've done 3, and I can't leave everybody wondering what was the
what was the 4th one.
So the final step is E, engage with your values, and that's about just taking a minute to think about the big picture. Who and what matter to me in life? What do I want to stand for? What things matter to me in this situation? And then it helps you when you're deciding what kind of plan do I want to carry out, because sometimes you do have to, it's like I talk about, if you've got anxiety, you sometimes have to put that anxiety in your backpack and you have to just go for it even before it's gone. You can't necessarily wait. People often want to be anxiety free before they go and do the thing that scares them, but actually in the real world we all have anxiety, and actually being willing to just pack it up, put it in and do it anyway is actually a more helpful way, and it often is more effective, because you don't then have to be free of it in order to get on and do something that you care about. So you need to know what you care about that makes it worth the effort of doing all of that, and so that's why your values really matter.
And that's crucial. And that whole thing about you don't have to be anxiety free, because I think there's a lot of people who walk around thinking, I have to be cured, or I have to be fixed, or before I can do what I need to do, I have to be fearless and courageous. It's like, no, you can be scared and still do it, but you got to do it. And that's why I love the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
Yes, I love that book.
Yeah, Susan Jeffers, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And it's crucial. It's this idea that we must be without any fear or anxiety. And then so a lot of people are sitting back and holding themselves back because they're afraid, because they still have their fear, and they think, oh, but I have to be fearless before I can go ahead.
Exactly. I mean, I think about many things that I've done, and actually a lot of the time there's fear, or there's fear of failure. There could be fear of something bad happening, and but you still have to choose whether something's worth your effort and investment in time and energy to achieve, and kind of believe in where you're going in the journey, and recognize that the journey doesn't have to be this amazing straight line where it's all going to be great, but actually
it's a linear line.
But just going in a direction towards, even though it might be weaving a bit, but as long as we're moving life in the trajectory, roughly in a direction that matters, then actually that's really valuable thing to do.
And it's crucial. It's crucial because we're never going to be fearless. Dr. David, you are a doctor. You have done many amazing things. So I'll ask you this. Would you say that you are totally fear-free and have no anxiety whatsoever?
I would 100% not say that. I have fears, and I think they make me a better doctor. I think they make me a better parent. They make me a nicer person, because I've experienced the difficult feelings. I've experienced, there's been a whole lot of stuff in the media about racism of late, as you'll be aware. Of course. And we've all experienced those things, and those things shape us, and the acknowledge part is about saying, yeah, I have all of that stuff, and I recognize it, and then I take it. I think it's a question of becoming bigger to make space for it, basically. So I feel like you're not trying to get rid of any of those bits, but we're trying to increase our capacity so that we've got space to have all of that inside, plus all of the other bits as well. And so that we can then make these choices about, given my experiences, who do I want to be? Back to my values. What do I want to stand for? And that's how you then hold all those fears inside, is by, and I think mindfulness can help with that a little bit, that expansion. I see it as a way of kind of making space inside me.
I like that imagery. I do like the vision of it's not that you're getting rid of the fear, but you're making yourself bigger. And so if you want to think about the fear in terms of to your new expanded self, it kind of lives in the basement of you, and you grow. I like that imagery, and I think we need to share that imagery more, because there's this idea of, and get rid of the fact that we have to be fearless, because I don't think I've met anybody who's fearless.
No, exactly. And the other imagery that I use quite a lot is recognizing the parts of yourself as that are struggling, that are fearful, as a kind of a creature like a puppy or a kitten that's gone out and got wet and cold and muddy and lost overnight. Oh. And then you hear a scratching on the door, and you're like, oh, where's my new pet? And you open the door, and there they are, and they're all scratched up, and they may even be bleeding. They're wet, they're muddy, they're a bit stinky. And so that's the difficult parts of ourselves, is that we really, part of you wants to just shut the door and go, God, I don't really want to take that on. But actually that fearful part is a part that actually is needing of care, and often maybe a very young part of ourselves as well. And so what does it need? You know, the part of us that's fearful, it needs to be picked up. It needs to be kind of back to compassion. It needs to be cared for, wrapped in a towel, you know, dried off. And it might be fighting us a little bit and struggling, because that's what happens when you've got difficult feelings. They're not very comfortable.
Yeah.
And so the instinct is shut them away, push them out. But actually they are a part that's in pain, and actually that part is asking to be cared for. And I think that's where self-compassion for me is a really important thing, is recognizing this for me is a moment that I'm suffering, I'm struggling. And instead of beating myself up, you shouldn't be scared here, it's wrong, you know, get rid of the fear, it's bad, that fear is bad, go away. But actually the fear is just scared. It just basically needs a bit of a hug and a bit of a stroke. And I think that imagery for me can be very powerful in kind of how strong you have to be. And so actually that's where compassion can be strength. Yeah. Because being able to stand and hold that scared part of you, stand still and do the thing that's right for you, can often be much harder than actually instinctively doing what we might do that's unhelpful, whether it's kicking out, running away. You know, there's all kinds of things we do that sabotage ourselves.
Exactly.
We eat unhealthily, we have too much to drink. You know, there's plenty of ways that we can choose that are harmful to ourselves, and we're doing it as a kind of shame thing. It's like a kind of beating ourselves up. And I think,
that, and I you know, it's something that's been educated into us. And, you know, if you are wrong, you know, we're told you fail, you're wrong. And so I think there's a re-education, and I do like the imagery of your fear being a wet, stinky puppy that just needs some love, needs some TLC, and the wet, stinky puppy actually can turn out to be great when you know, clean it up. And I do like that imagery. It's actually quite cool. So, you know, we're still looking at CBT. We're looking at the 10-minute. We're looking at the book. Your first book was using CBT in general practice, the 10-minute consultation. Now, when this initially came out, how was it received by other GPs? Because, again, we're going back to medical professionals who are, well, I know what I'm doing. So how did they take to this new concept?
Well, it was really positive, actually. And people have been, I think I get very enthusiastic about it. And I think what I say to people is, look, you have amazing skills. You know, I'm not here because you don't have that, but actually we can all add. I found this way of adding some tools to my toolkit. And as GPs, you have to be able to do a little bit of everything. And so actually, this is just another skill to help do one element of your practice and hopefully support you and be able to do that in a slightly different way that you might find helpful in some situations. And actually, people have really been very positive about that. And so I would say it's been a really positive experience for me.
And that's very good. And I love the fact that you are excited and you can hear you're passionate for it. And when it comes to parents, when it comes to not just the medical community, how can we actually incorporate the 10-minute CBT into our own lives and using it with kids? How can we use it to manage behaviors? And actually, I think, let me just add one more question before you start, is how old do the children have to be before we can use it on them?
Well, I think you can start, you know, using these concepts really, really young. And it's, you know, I was talking to a friend who's got a 3-year-old, and I lent them one of my kids' old books on feelings. Right. And she said she's gone from saying sad, 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 sad to worried, afraid, joy. So she's got this vocabulary about feelings, which I think is really important. So one of the first things is using a kind of 5 areas framework. So being able to recognize feelings, thoughts, behaviors, and what's happening in the body, and then what's going on around, and break it down in that way. And you can start doing that with really young children. You can talk about feelings and thoughts and just bring it into the vocab. And I think that's a really important thing that we should be doing more. I wish it was in the curriculum, to be honest. I would love to see some CBT. That would be my next campaign, would be to bring this into how we should be teaching the population to recognise and to be able to recognise. I have children who are 8 and 11, and we talk about it quite a lot at different times. Just simple things like feeling your feet on the ground if you're starting to feel a bit anxious. And it's just little things that can be very powerful. So it doesn't have to be 10 minutes. It might be 1 minute.
Right. And I think bringing it into schools will actually change how we function as a society, because then we can check in, because some of the things that we're suffering now in the society with everything going on wouldn't happen if we were more in tune with our own feelings and more aware. And speaking of that, I do know that there is the feeling song, which is aimed at toddlers now. And so, because I have nephews who are 3.5, and we've gone through the feeling songs, and he goes, one of them will go, I'm like, what's that? He goes, angry face.
I love that.
So he goes, angry face, happy face. And so, they now have these nursery rhymes that take them through that. So I think that's probably how it's going to sneak into the curriculum, through songs and play.
Absolutely. And I know there's a lot more mindfulness being brought in, so there's definitely an increase in focus, but I think there's more that we can do, because ultimately well-being underpins everything.
Yes.
About how we learn and whether we're able to even learn, because strong emotions make it very difficult to engage in learning. So actually sometimes you need to learn to manage emotions as a way of being able to improve learning. So we have for the COVID situation, developed a sort of a short video education module aimed at teenagers.
Okay.
Called 10-minute steps to surviving lockdown. Okay. And that's on our website, which is 10minutecbt.co.uk.
Right.
And so people could log in, go to the online learning section and access that. That would be one way. And it's just got some videos that just run through some of the key emotions, like, anger, that angry face, anxiety, feeling low. I'm getting a lot of parents saying that their young people are saying that they're bored, and I think there's a fine line from boredom, which can be healthy if it leads to stimulated doing something about it, but if it just leads to kind of lethargy, sort of falling into gaming on without respite, lack of contact with the world, then that actually can lead to low mood,
right.
And you worry about kind of people getting depressed as a consequence if there's a lot of avoidance of kind of social contact. So we want people to be engaged in computer activity and do it, but not to the exclusion of other things.
Right. Okay. So we'll go on. We'll talk about where they can find it on your website. You give them all the details of where you can find that. I just have a couple of more questions, because you're very fascinating, Dr. David. In your gap year, you decided to become an expedition medic in Chile. What's an expedition medic?
Yeah. So I think I've always been drawn to just doing lots of different things, and so after my first year as a house officer, I took a year out. I had a gap year and did some traveling, and as part of that I did some trekking in Nepal, and then I went to South America for 6 months.
Okay.
And was an expedition medic for an organisation called Rally International, who I think are still going, and they send out young people to do expeditions.
Okay.
So I was an expedition medic there, and there was a range of doctors, paramedics, nurses, all working together with teams of young people, and we went out into the communities in Chile. So I did things like we're Canadian canoeing down the fjords of Patagonia with icebergs, and sort of carrying our own bivouacs. We didn't even have tents. We had to sleep under these waterproof kind of just shelters, and carry all our food. But it was an amazing experience, and it was great to connect with young people and with my teammates. And so I I think for me, travel was one of my the big things that helped me to have the confidence to be able to do what was right for me, to follow my values and to take some of the steps. You know, we're talking about that commit to a plan. Sometimes the steps are hard, you know, there's roadblocks, there's things that get in the way. And I think for me, that experience of traveling, seeing different people, working with people, seeing different countries, seeing amazing sights that I'd never seen, like icebergs and glaciers. And it just opened up my eyes to the fact that, you know, this world is an amazing, big, exciting place, and there's so much opportunity, and I don't want to miss that. And so it kind of really helped me to continue to maybe make some decisions, like setting up a company, which is not necessarily something I'd never done that before, deciding to do the training, to do the CBT, you know, a little bit outside the norm, trying to do things that I care about, basically. And I think that really helped me.
Okay. I can actually see that will be a broadening exercise. I'm not sure about sleeping under some waterproof things. I'm not sure about that part, but I'm sure about the broadness that comes with travel, and I can see it had a profound impact on your life. And so that's something that I think everybody should have an opportunity to travel and see the world and see the vastness of it. And when we're looking at CBT, we've talked about how it can be used. We've talked about it can be used for just for your health. You can use it with stopping smoking. You can use it with so many different things. How have you particularly used it in your own life?
Well, I think it's been really powerful at times when you have difficult feelings, and they can be triggered by all kinds of things, you know, and so when you're if you're losing confidence, then I think it's been helpful for me to be able to stop and just pause and recognize, like we were saying, I'm having these feelings, I'm having these thoughts. And I think for me that the metaphor about the puppy and that animal has been actually something that I genuinely have felt that I've needed to work on, because I have a tendency to be quite self-critical. I can be really hard on myself, and when that's happening, you need to just notice this is happening. Yeah. And actually, I'm starting to beat myself up here. I'm starting to be critical, and it's actually, do you know what? It hurts. It's not a very nice feeling. And just noticing that and just letting go a little bit of the story of, you've done it. You shouldn't have said that. You should. Why didn't you come up? What will they think? You know, that old story that can come up. And when that's starting to play, and that's my old friend, you know, that record can start to play, it's scratched and grooved, and it will play itself out. But if I'm now at the point where I can say, here, okay, I see you, for old friend, and just sort of make a bit of space for it, and try and be kind to myself, and then get back to, and not allow it to make me then do something else that I then regret. Yeah.
And I think that's crucial, because those voices never go away.
No,
it's funny you call them your old friend. I call them the chimp committee. Yes. I call them the chimp committee that have cheap seats, and they're basically just paid to heckle you. And exactly. they don't go away. And I think that's something that we need to get back to talking about, in the sense of, they never go away. They're always there. They will elevate as you grow. Their story will change, but they never go away. So if we're waiting for that moment for them to be totally quiet before we do anything, we'll never do anything.
No, exactly. And actually what usually quietens my lot down is by doing something that actually is a positive thing for me in the bigger picture. And then they like, oh, okay, you know, because just engaging in something important, and then their voices kind of drift off because other things start to take much more focus.
I treat them like I would treat a mugger. So it's, you know how we're told, if someone wants to mug you, take your wallet, throw it in the other direction, and you go in the other direction. Yeah. What I do is I do exactly that with the chimp committee. I throw them questions for them to ponder on, and then I run off. literally run off.
Yes.
So I'm like, when they start going, yeah, you're never going to be any good, I go, what? How so? What exactly do you mean I'll never be any good? What, good at eating, good at breathing? I've been breathing since I was born. I'm kind of fairly good at the breathing thing. And I throw foolish questions to distract them long enough so I can kind of tiptoe away and do other things.
Definitely. And I think the key is the doing of the other things, you know, whatever it takes to get you to those other things, and making sure that what those things that you're doing, that you tiptoe away to do, are things that you want to be doing. They're not things. The danger is if the things that you tiptoe away to do are things to try and silence the voices. And so then that's when we run in the risk of doing something that's probably unhealthy, and you might find yourself shouting at someone else, and actually you're trying to silence some difficult feelings inside yourself through doing that. And so what the key is to make sure that whatever you choose to do, it's because you value it.
Yes, and it's not a reactionary thing. I think that's important. I think we need t-shirts with it.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So, you know, we're talking about CBT, we're talking about your journey, we're talking about a 10-minute CBT program. And one of the other things that we know that CBT is good for is resilience and the practice of resilience. So how do we bounce back? How do we build our own resilience muscles on a day-to-day?
Well, I think that's a hugely important thing. And I'm actually a great believer in kind of negative stuff having a message. And actually, it's, you know, nothing in life, it comes just positive. And so, in fact, we learn, we grow through whatever experiences we have. And, you know, sometimes what in the short term feels negative turns out to have been a blessing later on. So I think for me, it's about big picture thinking. It's and, you know, I think there are times in CBT that you focus in on the detail and you're recognizing I'm having this specific thought right now, or my feet are on the ground. And there are other times you kind of need to be able to pan between both. You need to also be able to look at the stars and, you know, spot the shooting star and look at the panorama and recognize how big the earth is and actually how small we are. And we need to be able to shift between both of those perspectives. And I think resilience for me involves doing both of those things. So it's being able to stand on a hillside and look at the huge panorama of the world and say, in the bigger picture, what does this mean actually? And, you know, is it really that a big a deal? Because quite often the thing that feels like a catastrophic, you know, disaster, is just a minor blip at, you know, in the bigger picture of your life. And then it's coming into the small details as well, recognizing, acknowledging it might be a small thing, but I am having some big feelings. Okay. And so they have to be acknowledged. They're real. The anxiety is real. The tightness in my chest is real.
Yeah.
But I don't want to allow that to stop me from doing what's important. So it's just coming back. And I know I'm kind of saying this a lot, but I think it's recognize, acknowledge, and then come back to what matters.
Yeah.
Because if we with trauma, for example, there's a lot of people who are having some traumatic experiences with the COVID. You know, it may be being in hospital and not having, you know, all the health professionals wearing masks. It may be, you know, fear for your own health, for somebody you care about, not being able to visit. There's a lot of traumatic experiences. Yeah. And so for dealing with this, it's really important that we do acknowledge and recognize what's happened, and that we talk about it, and that we don't try and block it, because the majority of people who go through a traumatic experience, if you talk about it and are able to share it in small ways, it often will resolve. You're able to resolve the trauma in your mind, and it only really becomes post-traumatic stress disorder when we're not able to do that. And if that's the case, then therapy is very effective. So it's really important that people do seek help if they've had a trauma. Okay. But if you've just had a difficult experience, it's really important not to shut that away or to turn to something like alcohol as a way of blotting it out. That is a way to not process, and that's the opposite of resilience. That kind of is storing up problems to come later down the line.
And we have to practice it. It's like any muscle. It only grows when we practice it, and it takes time. It's not something that we are born with, or we have a finite amount. We have to practice.
Absolutely. And it's practicing doing stuff. We do stuff not because we're necessarily feeling great at that moment, but because it's leading us in a direction that matters. And often the good feelings come down the line. They may not come at the moment of taking that action. And so that can be difficult because you're kind of having to do something and it doesn't feel great. And actually, it's only later when you stop and think, oh, do you know what? I'm really glad I did that.
Exactly. I think that's how I feel about going to the gym.
That's 100% how I feel about exercise, and so for exercise I have to kind of lull myself into it, but I always say to myself, look, if you just want to walk today, just walk, don't worry about it. So that's my micro step. I just want to be out there moving my body in some way, and if I don't feel up to doing a big fast run today, which is then fine, and then often as I get out there, actually I feel a lot better, and then I actually do more than I was kind of. And so I convince myself by setting these micro goals and not overloading the expectation.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the word, not overloading the expectation. On our road to resiliency, we take it one step at a time, give ourselves the micro goals, have the expectation that things will get better, but don't overload, because I think that's another thing. We set ourselves up sometimes. We're like, yes, we're going to do this. And then when we don't meet it, we then give ourselves further reason to go back to whipping ourselves. And I think that's so powerful.
And the other thing I think is that we can be a little bit too outcome focused. So it's a bit like, say my kids have a maths problem that they have to do, and they're like, am I going to get it right? Am I going to get it right? And like, well, does asking yourself if you're going to get it right, does that help you to get it right? Because actually all it does is get your mind occupied on something else.
Yes.
I was talking to someone who had some anxiety about horse riding, and she's saying when she starts riding, her mind starts saying, am I going to fall off? Am I going to, of course, the minute you start going into your mind about am I going to fall off, the less engaged you are in the process of riding, and actually the horse probably notices, and so it's this vicious cycle.
Exactly. You just kind of create a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the horse is like, oh, you're not paying attention, I'm going to buck this way.
Exactly. Woo, off you go. So what we need to do is focus more on the journey than on where we're going, and plan and do the steps on the way, rather than, obviously it's important to take time at times to stop and think, which direction am I going? But you don't want to spend your whole time thinking about the future. Is this going to happen?
Yeah.
Because that is a great distraction from what is happening right now. What am I doing right now? So if it's doing maths, it's okay, what does it say? What
am I learning it now?
Yeah. And can I read the question? What's the first three words? What do they mean? And and so it's interpreting the information in front of us. If it's horse riding, it's like, what does it feel like? What my seat on the saddle, my feet in the stirrups, my hands on the reins, the smell of the horse, the color, the surroundings, and you can bring yourself back into your body and kind of engage yourself in that moment, and then have a breath and then carry on and do it. And I think that's really key for not getting in the story about, it could be a positive daydream. Oh, it'll be so great when but equally that is a distraction. It doesn't help you do it quite often.
Because when you're so in the future, you cannot be in that moment. You cannot actually be tangible because you're elsewhere.
Exactly.
So let's go back very quickly to the CBT, 10-minute CBT. How can people engage with it? And is it just for health practitioners at this moment?
So we do a lot for health professionals, but I also do, I do some one-to-one therapy at the moment, mostly video-based, because of coronavirus. So that's available via the website, or there is the video program, which could be watched by young people aged, I would say 12 to probably 19, or by parents. I think actually it's a really helpful thing for parents to watch, preferably with the young person, and talk about it, because I think the conversation you have about it is probably the most powerful way of how might you bring this into your life. You know, what resonates for you in this video? Is there anything you can make sense? You know, what might you do differently? So I think those are available. I'm co-writing a book for young people at the moment that's hopefully going to be published later this year. So that's a watch this space.
All right. Well, once it's published, we need to get you back on here and we'll talk about the book once it's live.
That'd be great.
Awesome. So, what's the website? We've been saying 10-minute CBT. How can people find you on social media? How can people connect in with you?
So it's www.10minutecbt.co.uk, and that's a 10 with a 10.
Okay. And you're on LinkedIn, you're on
Yes.
Instagram, Twitter, Facebook?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Facebook, yes.
Okay, so folks, you know how to find Dr. David and the 10-minute CBT. Look out for it because it's crucial that we maintain our health, not just our health, but also for our young people in our lives right now. And I think it's actually crucial. So I've actually, funny enough, I actually watched the video last night and I'm like, oh, so I realize I'm not the target group, but it's a good video to watch because it actually pulls your attention to say, how am I being intentional with what I'm doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So we have reached that point in the show where we talk about our so loud moment of the week. What is your so loud moment, Dr. Lee Davids?
So I found it really hard because I'm as we've talked about today, I love micro goals and I like lots of small things, and I feel like it's a multi-step thing that's got me. But I think there's two moments I wanted to mention.
Okay.
And one of them came, I think it was in my second year at medical school, having come from a comprehensive school where and then coming to medical school where there was a lot of people who'd been to public school. They're very articulate, very intelligent, full of energy. And I was very intimidated. I was thought, wow, do I fit in here? I don't think I'm as clever as these people. They all seem to know what they're talking about. They're all more confident than I am. I'm not very good at expressing myself. I don't know. And so the first year or so, I found it really hard to adjust, and I was questioning, is this the right path for me? Mm-hmm. And then in the second year, it kind of all clicked together. I found some people that I connected with that sort of, I had a really good some relationships where people were eclectic and they had some diverse views, which I was suddenly like, oh, thank goodness, I found my tribe.
Yes.
And that really made a difference. And then at the end of that year, I won a scholarship for my exam results,
awesome.
Which enabled me to go and do an extra qualification, a third year in philosophy and sociology of medicine, and which was a really great year for me because it enabled me to see again things in a slightly different way, not just the norm, but it was looked at all kinds of different perspectives. And so that moment that I won that award was for me huge, because I really had thought I'm not of a standard like these people. And then to actually win it based on my academic performance in that setting, it absolutely blew me away, because I could afford to go and do this extra degree, which I couldn't have done otherwise. And it kind of just acknowledged, look, you could do it, if you put the work in. I worked super hard. Don't get me wrong. I was a complete nerdy geek. I worked all the hours. It did not happen through, luck. I earned every moment of that, but it taught me that if you do work really hard, you can do it, and you have that capability if you work in the right ways and you choose, study techniques that are effective. Yeah, you can do it. And so for me, that was hugely powerful. The other moment I want to mention is, you mentioned my book. Well, I have to bring it out. So here it is. And I think just seeing my name right there, that was probably that's probably the more exciting so loud moment of when I first got this book through the post and saw Lee David on the cover, and CBT, I was like, that was like, wow, this is something. It's like giving birth, actually, because it was really hard work to write the book. It was a lot of effort, and so to see it culminated, all my effort, my belief, because this is something that I kind of invented on my own, if you like, so it's been quite a solitary journey, and so for it to be recognized that someone wanted to publish it and then people actually wanted to buy it, that was an amazing kind of moment.
You know what? First of all, let me go back and celebrate your going back from uni days, going back to that study, getting the award. So we need to celebrate that, because there's something about where you enter an environment where you feel like you don't belong, and to first of all find a tribe, but also to thrive in that environment. And we're being very nuanced about the way we're defining it, but to thrive in an environment where you feel like you don't belong is very, very powerful. So I take my hat off to you, my entire audience. We sharing along, and yes, having your name on the book, no matter what anybody says, you're like,
yeah, I'm like, what does my I was like, my mum was like,
I'm sure your mom has copies, and when certain people come to the house, she whips it out, go.
She does, yes.
I know moms, I know what they do.
I've just published a new one, and she's like, where's my copy?
Give your mom the copy, because you know
she's the one that needs it more than anyone.
It will make the rounds.
Yeah.
You gotta love moms. So Dr. David Lee, thank you for being on the show today. It's been absolutely awesome. And just to remind people, 10minutecbt.co.uk is where to find you. They can connect with you on LinkedIn as well, under your name as well. And yes, please, people, let's start taking the micro actions to be mindful about our health moving forward. COVID had changed things, but we get to be the deciders of how we live our lives. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You are so, so welcome. So folks, it's a wrap. You know what to do. Go and like the show on iTunes. Give us a review. Listen to us. What you can find us. You know where to find us. We're on Google. We're on Spotify. We're on Amazon. We're on Deezer. We're everywhere. Go find us, go listen, and then go on to 10minutecbt.co.uk, connect with Dr. Lee. If you have questions, reach out to her. So you know what to do. We're going to be same place, same time next week. Catch you soon. Bye.
You've been listening to The Shine Out Loud Show. If you want to connect with us or let us know what you thought of today's show, be sure to follow us on Twitter @Shine Out Show.